Hey, what's up? This is Chosen, and we just had the Diablo 4 Developer Campfire Chat here on July 21st, 2023, where Blizzard was talking through some of the changes and things going on with the game and what is going to be coming in the future of Diablo 4, and then they took a Q&A session towards the end. So what I'm going to do is go through and talk about the highlights and the quick notes from this about 90-minute chat or so that they had streaming over on Twitch and YouTube. And buckle in, I'll give you my full thoughts and the full summary of everything that happened in the campfire chat. Let's get into it. Alrighty, so first off, the viewer numbers, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it sustained around 50,000 just under on Twitch and like in the low 30,000s on YouTube. Now, if we look at the summary that we had from the last developer stream, we were sustaining about 115,000 on Twitch, and that was back when they were talking on Thursday, July 7th about Season 1. So it looks like they've lost just over half, which isn't surprising. You're going to have a lot of people that are super hyped up to hear about what's the Season 1 mechanic, when's the season going to start, and all of that stuff. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that it's just under half as many viewers here for a developer live stream chat during Season 1 as opposed to the hype leading up to Season 1. I think it's about, I would have expected it to be about 50 to 60K there on Twitch if the Season 1 lead up was 115. So I say all that to say that I do think there's still a decent amount of hype within the game of people that are willing to come back to Diablo 4 if we start getting some changes to the game that are bringing quality of life and we start getting some patches that are received more positively than this last one. Okay, so first up, they acknowledged the concerns about the patch and they wanted to address why they made those choices and how they can communicate better with the community here in the future for other patches. I would say the overall tone of the developer campfire chat today was like a little bit more serious, like less jokes. There was less banter and less like colonoscopy jokes, and there was less like laughing. You can tell that they feel the environment around Diablo 4 has become pretty negative, especially in the last week or two. Things have really taken a big hit in terms of community positivity and people being excited for the game. So you can tell that it kind of affected them a little bit, and this stream was a lot more of a serious tone with less joking around. But then for the things that they started out discussing, I'm going to kind of go in chronological order as I was taking notes here watching the campfire chat. So CDR discussion and how it eliminates other options. They were talking about this and how CDR for a lot of builds, especially with like the sorcerer, you're trying to rotate through all of your barriers and teleport around, and you can't do any damage unless you have Frost Nova up and stuff like that. So they understand that CDR is an insanely strong stat, and they don't want it to dwarf everything else in the game. They don't want CDR to feel like it's mandatory every single spot you can get it, otherwise your build is just terrible. So they're kind of ripping the band-aid off and wanting to adjust that, but they do realize that they need to bring other stuff up to snuff in terms of competing with CDR. And if you're newer to RPGs, CDR is cooldown reduction. Sorry if I didn't mention that earlier. But then also, Nightmare Dungeons are way too overtuned, and it makes the game too specific where only certain setups and builds can work. They will be drastically reducing Nightmare Dungeons to a point where the current Tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon is going to be pretty comparable to a current Tier 70 Nightmare Dungeon, and I believe that's going to be coming pretty soon here in a hot fix. So, they talked about how they want to have other content that really challenges players besides just Nightmare Dungeons, and even a little bit later here, I'll talk about the leaderboards and how leaderboards are probably going to have a different mechanic in them. It's not just going to be like a leaderboard around Nightmare Dungeons, which is what people thought was going to happen because in Diablo 3, the leaderboards revolved around kind of the Diablo 3 version of Nightmare Dungeons, which is Greater Rifts. So they said that the leaderboards aren't going to be that, and they're kind of going to be reducing these to a point where players can farm them a little bit more reliably and get their builds online a little bit sooner to be able to farm them in a launch of a new season. And they talked about how the game being a live service means they will keep adding different ways for players to challenge themselves instead of it just being kind of like Nightmare Dungeons and then Uber Lilith. Then, obviously, vulnerable damage is a hot topic right now. Vulnerable damage ended up being far more potent than they wanted it to be, so they need to bring things back in line, and that is going to kind of cause a shock to the system because everybody kind of had these builds and these playstyles that were designed around obviously getting permanent vulnerable uptime and then scaling that to the moon to hit insane big damage numbers, and they want to bring that down into line where vulnerable isn't so overperforming everything else in the game. And then at that point, they took a break to show this image right here where it talked about the mission statement of Diablo 4, and it had 4 different points on it saying a wide variety of viable builds to discover, put together, and optimize across all 5 classes, new items and powers every season to keep the game fresh and increase build variety, continually evolving endgame content with high mob density for powerful builds to mow down, and activities to challenge your build. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would have opportunities where you want like insane high AoE clear speed builds, and you want an area for them to shine, and then you also want an area for some of like the boss killer single target builds to shine. And a way that games like Diablo 3 address this is they have like the rifting system and the dungeons and the bounties where you want a bunch of like AoE clear, and then they have like the uber fights where you're fighting like a big boss and it has an opportunity for you to try out those single target builds. So Diablo 4 is going to need to evolve to a way where they can kind of create opportunities for players to have fun no matter what their playstyle is, and then have different ways to really shine within the game. And then they want to make the game more fun for players. This is a big thing. There's some mechanics in the game that just aren't fun. They feel like chores instead of fun. So I do think that's really important for them to address here in future big patches for sure. And then after that, they showed an image talking about their goals and moving forward when making changes. And when making changes to increase build diversity, let some builds be overpowered until we have provided compelling alternatives. These meta changes will occur at predictable times, like the start of a season, and in situations where a bug is causing game-breaking damage or crashes, we will react quickly. So from now on, they talked about how big changes will be shared with the community well before a season launches, like at least a week before. I hope they get into the Diablo 3 flow. Sorry, I keep talking about Diablo 3. I mean, it's the most recent kind of Diablo iteration. Obviously, 3 versus 4 is going to be a common comparison. But in Diablo 3, they release it like 2 or 3 weeks before a new season is going to launch, and they have a PTR, which is a public test realm where content creators and community members and players can get in and really test things. They allow you to level up super fast on the PTR and test a bunch of different mechanics before the season is going to launch, and then they have a chance to make adjustments based on all of that testing within the community before a season launches. So they could have noticed things like, oh, the sorcerer is really underperforming, and then they're going to adjust it before the season actually goes live. And when you do it that way, you end up with a lot less backlash and people feeling really bad about patches moving into a season. And then they also said next Friday, in exactly 1 week, they will do another developer stream to go through the entire next big patch notes with everyone for better communication this time around, and that patch should be live within 2 weeks or so. They really didn't want to give a definite timeline on patch 1.1.1, but they did say expect it within 2 weeks. So if I had to guess, they're going to do the developer stream again next Friday, exactly 1 week from now. I would expect the patch to go live at some point like Tuesday through Thursday in that next week. So somewhere around like 10 to 13 days from now, I would expect the big 1.1.1 patch to go live, and they talked about it a lot in this developer stream. And also how that patch is going to heavily address the Barbarian and the Sorcerer. Now, I've noticed a couple times, I noticed this in the patch notes, sometimes they're calling Sorcerer things Wizard things, and I think they said that in the live stream as well. When I was watching it, I kind of caught it while I was taking notes, and I made note of like, they keep referring to the Sorcerer as Wizard. I don't know if that's intentional or if at some point they're going to change the Sorcerer to the Wizard, so we'll have to stay tuned, but it's just something that's caught me in terms of being interesting. And then I thought this was awesome right here. They talked about wanting mob density to be better, specifically in Helltides and Nightmare dungeons, where they're going to get substantially more dense. It's not just going to be a minor adjustment. I agree with that. I think Helltides should be really fun. You go, you group up with your friends, and there's demons coming at you in all directions. There's bosses spawning, and things are crazy, and you can go to the Helltide to really test your build and kill things super fast and farm up those ashes. And if you aren't ready for it, you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to die and you're going to lose your ashes, but if you are able to handle it, it's really rewarding. You can kill stuff super fast and open up chests and collect rewards and stuff. So they definitely need more mob density in Helltides, and it looks like that's going to be coming soon. And it will also be a lot more fun when they get added to Nightmare dungeons as well, so that's going to be a definite dub. And then, hey, look at this. In the next big patch, more stash space is coming, and they also made sure to say that elixir stack size is going to go up to 99. So hallelujah, we're finally getting another stash tab. I think the way they kind of worded it is it's going to be one stash tab. They're going to be adding, you know, another one that you can buy as you farm up gold. You can unlock another stash tab, but hey, at least now we can have like one extra space to put like a bunch of our top rolled aspects and all of that. Then they said a respec cost is going to be going down about 40% here in that big 1.1 patch in about 2 weeks. And they also want to make leveling from 50 to 100 faster. Their exact quote was that they want level 100 to feel like an achievement and not a job. Then at that point was the Q&A section of the Campfire Chat, and it was actually a pretty robust Q&A chat where they got to some of the questions here, and they talked about leaderboards are still planned for Season 3, so that's good news, and will most likely be a new mechanic. Like I said, that is not Nightmare Dungeons, so there will be some sort of new way to play the game, some sort of new content that is coming to Diablo 4, and then they will release leaderboards around that new content. It won't be Nightmare Dungeons is kind of what they were saying. Then Uber uniques were addressed. Obviously, everybody in the community, well, not everybody, but like 90-something% of people in the community feel that Uber uniques are way too rare, and it really kills the hype of seeing a new Uber unique being added to a season, because you're like, well, there's a 99.9% chance I'm never going to have that. Actually, it's probably like 99.999. I mean, there's literally like very few people on planet Earth that are going to drop an Uber unique during a season. So like a lot of people feel like, I mean, at least like we should feel that someone in our clan is going to get one. They're just like way too rare. But anyway, they said how they want them to be rare and not expected or mandatory. So their justification is they don't want builds to be like planned around getting a Shaco. And then people feel like they got to play 1,000 hours to drop a Shaco, or the build isn't going to be online until they get this certain Uber unique. They want them to be rare and super cool, but not mandatory where you have builds planned around them. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough line to walk, and they did admit that. But they plan to make them more likely to drop in the future, probably with the release of World Tier 5. If I had to guess, Uber uniques will get way more likely in that scenario. Then they plan to give players more tools to address being constantly CC'd. This is a super issue, especially for some classes like the Necromancer. There's just constant fear all over the ground on those paths that are making you run away for 5 seconds and getting frozen and stunned. And the CC is just, and it's not only CC. It's not like a slow or something. It's hard lockdown CC, and it is everywhere, and it is constant. I feel like it's way too overtuned. It's way too often. And then also on death mechanics, like the point, I was talking about this with a good friend of mine last night while we were leveling, and I was talking with Kyr about this, and it's like in a game where you want to kill stuff and then loot, you can't, because everything you kill blows up and you gotta wait 5 seconds before you can loot. So it's not really a fun design within a loot game like Diablo 4 to have every single thing you kill constantly exploding where you have to wait for it. So I do think that the hard CC and the on-death explosion effects are way too rampant in Diablo 4, so I hope they get adjusted there, or that players get some tools to be able to deal with that kind of stuff. And then loadouts is something that the UI team is focusing on getting implemented to the game, but there isn't any timeline as of right now. Now, loadouts are a like system where you can switch between builds. So you've got your Necromancer, you want to switch from full Bone Spear to full Minion, and you can just like go to the armory and click a button, and it will pull stuff from your stash, and it will switch around your Paragon and switch around your skill tree, and you can switch between different builds, or loadouts they're called in the gaming community, to really be able to swap your playstyle on the fly quickly with one click. And they do want to implement that at some point, but it's not coming anytime soon. Then they clarified that 1.1.1 will come much sooner than mid-season and should be expected within the next 2 weeks. We already talked about that. They plan to have Season 2 bring more avenues for players to target farm certain items and aspects that are really hard to get for getting a build online, so that'll be good. There will be other patches before Season 2 besides just that 1.1.1 patch coming in 2 weeks or so. They will add a group up feature at some point, but don't expect it anytime soon. Survivability on Sorcerer will be addressed in the next patch. We talked about that, how Barbarian and Sorcerer are going to be a big focus here in the next 10 to 15 days on that big 1.1 patch. The devs also talked about how they are noticing some mobs and effects are killing players a lot more than the devs expected, and I believe they did talk about the like on death effects, like all those explosions constantly happening and stuff like that. So they do want to address some of those things. And then why was dungeon leave time increased was asked, and they just kind of danced around it and didn't answer why. So my thought was they were going to say it was being abused by hardcore players to leave a dungeon. If like the butcher spawns in, they just click leave dungeon and they try to get out of there before they're forced to fight, which kind of ruins the immersion of hardcore. That's what I expected the answer to be, but they just kind of danced around it and said, oh, you know, we understand that increases to leave times and stuff can be a big deal, even if they are small changes. So we're taking note of that. And they just kind of didn't answer it. So that was one time here where I was like, huh? You didn't even address that. But otherwise, like the overarching like theme of the campfire chat, I thought they did a really good job, and I thought they really addressed a lot of the issues, but that was one they kind of skirted around. And then resistances will be heavily adjusted with a major rework to how they function as a system within the game coming by season 2. Campaign bosses will show up in future content that is going to be added to the game. More ways to craft and modify your gear will be coming in the future. Right now you can kind of like upgrade to the blacksmith, you can imprint an aspect, and you can also go ahead and like re-roll one of the stats, and they're going to be adding some other ways that you can interact with your gear or craft, you know, some super good pieces for your build and all of that. Then they ended with a message saying that they hear the criticism and will try to avoid shockwave patches like this in the future, and you can tune in around the same time next week, which is going to be 11 a.m. Pacific in the morning there, Western time, on next Friday, exactly 1 week from now, for the next developer chat, where they will talk more about that patch 1.1.1 coming here in about 10 to 15 days. So that was some of the highlights for me from the campfire chat personally that I noticed while watching it, and I think all in all, it was a dub. You know, obviously, Diablo 4 is in a tough spot right now because a lot of people are frustrated with Season 1 and some of the quality of life issues and the stash space and the aspects and the malignant hearts and the different things with like Sorcerer being nerfed. And there's lots of things to complain about. So I'm not going to give them like a 10 out of 10. But I did appreciate that they were willing to sit down and chat so soon. There's lots of game developers that wouldn't do this. They would just kind of ignore the feedback and keep doing their thing. So I would give them credit that at least they're trying. Like at least they are reaching out to the community and interacting and, you know, heading out there, facing things head on and talking about the actual discussions and not ignoring them. And then they're keeping us in the loop with things to expect. So it does still give me hope for the future. I'm hoping that with future seasons, we don't end up getting things like this and we get a little bit more hype coming into a season, because it was definitely a bummer to have a lot of the hype around season 1 die down and crater hard before season 1 even went live. So I think all in all, I'm going to give them a positive score from my point of view on the campfire chat, and I definitely feel better about season 1 and the direction of Diablo 4's future after hearing this chat compared to just reading the patch notes a couple days. I was really bummed out. This does at least give me a little bit more hope after hearing the campfire chat. But I will also host a poll over on the community tab of this channel where you can voice your opinion on if you liked the campfire chat or not, and we'll see what the positive rating is in relation to season 1 and the things that we heard in this campfire chat. But I appreciate all of you, and I will see you soon in the next video. It would mean a lot to earn your sub down below if you enjoy daily Diablo 4 content, and have a good rest of your day. Peace.